to you and your books, Robert?
Oh gosh, I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, I write the Ken Fisher murder mystery series. They're sort of classic whodunits featuring an amateur sleuth called Ken Fisher, funnily enough. Like me, he is an environmental health officer, and I got the idea, I suppose, while I was out on the district one day, wanting to create something different. And I suddenly thought, why not have an environmental health officer investigating a murder? And that's where it started, and we're now up to book 6, so I'm delighted it worked out.
So now one of the questions we got before we went live was from Sheila Bugler.
Yeah, I know Sheila very well.
Great. And I probably just murdered her surname really badly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Sheila. She wanted to know how much of you was in Kent Fisher.
Well,
sorry.
Yeah, there's a slight difference of opinion in this house as to how much of me is in Kent Fisher. My wife would say he's pretty much the same as me, and I would say when I started he was about 80% me, or should I say he was the sort of, shall we say, environmental health officer I would have loved to have been, but I would have probably lost my job if I had been like him. He wasn't much of one for authority and stuff like that, and he did some, I won't say outrageous things, but he pushed the boundaries. And the trouble is, in reality, if you do something like that in local government, you're in for a bit of a hiding. So in a way, he was largely me, but the sort of me that I would have loved to have been if I wasn't afraid of losing my job.
I mean, he nearly loses his job in the books, doesn't he? Certainly, I'm like at the end of book 2, and he's skirted close to going a couple of times already.
Yeah, he gets suspended in another one of the books as well. So, no, originally his father was the local MP, who was also a cabinet minister, so that sort of protected him. So that's really how he got away with it. That his bosses were afraid that the local MP might come down hard on them if they sacked his son.
He's also, as a sideline, apart from being an environmental health officer, he has like a small animal sanctuary, doesn't he? And what inspired you to sort of write that part?
That's if I had a bucket list, that would probably be top of my bucket list to have the money and the means to run an animal sanctuary and rescue animals that otherwise would be slaughtered prematurely or have no life at all. And I just thought it would be interesting to actually, shall we say, fulfill that wish through the story. And I thought it also shows a side of him that you've read a couple of books. He's not one for expressing his emotions, but I think in the stuff with the sanctuary, that's where you get to see a little bit of the side of him that he doesn't show anybody else. So I thought it was quite nice to use him to show a sort of softer side of him.
I think
he can be quite belligerent, so he needed to have a softer side.
You see the softer side of him as well with his stepmom a little bit, don't you? Stepmom,
yes,
the right word, but
yeah, I mean, still waters run deep, as they say. I think originally I struggled a bit with the emotional side of things, and it's quite easy when you're writing something to just get carried away. And when I used to look back and revise, I used to think, oh, blimey, and some of the emotional stuff was just a bit too much. So I sort of cut it back, and I ended up cutting it back so much that there wasn't much of it left. And so I ended up in the opposite end of the scale. So bringing in the animal sanctuary seemed to sort of solve most of the problems. It gave me a chance to show him and how he responds to animals and that side of things, as well as his concerns for the environment.
So what made you decide to make him? I know you were an environmental health officer, but what made you decide to make Kent one?
Well, I first really started to look at writing crime back in the late 80s. I was a huge fan of Inspector Morse, and I love Miss Marple anyway, because obviously Agatha Christie's a big hero of mine. And all I could see was there was all these sort of inspectors who were either fat, drunk, smoked too much, all the rest of it. And I thought it'd be nice to do something different, a bit like Miss Marple is different. And then I was lucky enough to get an introductory offer on something called the Book of the Month Club, which may or may not still be going. And it was the first 3 books by somebody called Sue Grafton, who's an American author, who wrote the Alphabet Murder series. And reading those, I suddenly realised that I could have a sort of private detective and somebody different from the police, because I knew nothing about how the police really worked. I worked with the police, but I didn't understand how they worked. So I thought, what should I do? And I thought, well, why don't you do what you know? I mean, environmental health officers are enforcement officers. I've enforced the law. I've interviewed people on tape and video. I've been into court and prosecuted them. So we sort of do what the police do, but obviously we don't do murders. We do things like people who breach hygiene regulations, or employers whose workers end up dying in accidents, things like that. So I thought, nobody's done an environmental health officer investigating murders. So that was the starting point.
What's your writing style like? Are you a plotter or someone who makes it up as you go along?
You mean a pantser? Yeah. I plan very little, mainly because I've got no idea when I start a story where it's going to go. I know that sounds ridiculous. You must have some idea, but quite honestly, I start with an idea or something. With No Remorse, the 3rd book, it was a line of dialogue. They're trying to kill me, but they'll never find my secret. And that's where I started. I had really no idea where I was going to go with it. And within 5, 6, 10 chapters, the whole story just tumbled out of my brain and off I went. And that's sort of how it goes. I start off, I sort of feel my way along for a few chapters, and slowly everything starts to connect. The brain's wonderful. It's doing all this without me knowing it. It's all going on in the subconscious. And things that you write in the early stages that you don't even realise you've written suddenly become important later on, and it's as if the brain knows where I'm going before I get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I tried it once or twice, and it works, so I've just sort of carried on doing it. It just sounds crazy, I just start off with a couple of lines and off I go, but that literally is, when I'm staring at the screen, I start off with that first couple of lines and off I go. But the story usually comes to me well before the finish. I think I would really be in trouble if it didn't.
See, I'm always amazed when authors say this to me, especially when I've read a few of their books, because yours have got so many kind of complex characters, and there's like a big sort of range of characters and all of them that carry on through, and I don't know how you can just do that, making it up as you.
Well, funnily enough, when I come to start a new book, I look at the backstory first, because obviously he's got a job, he's got an animal sanctuary, things are going on in previous books in the backstory. So I sort of say, right, well, when's the next story start? 6 months down the line. What's happened in that 6 months? What time of year it is? You know this, you're in local authority. The financial year starts in April, so you always have to be conscious of, the mad rush in March to spend up and making plans for it. So all those little things, once I've sorted all those out, so I've got the background ready, I then start writing the book against that background. So in a way, a lot of these complex characters and situations in the background are actually thought out ahead, though not in great detail. I just know roughly, just like you would know if it's somebody's birthday coming up during the duration of a book, so you don't miss it, things like that. So that's really, if I do any planning, it's on that side of things, to make sure that everything in the backstory goes seamlessly from book to book.
Do you keep notes about your characters?
I've got a spreadsheet that's called the Bible, and I try, and I'm not necessarily that good at it. I try to make notes of important things like the ages of people, where they work, important events that might come up in a future chapter, a future book. So I do keep a record, but it's I still have to check back a lot of times to find out what colour hair somebody's got, or things like that. But I do try and keep some kind of record.
So one of the questions on the stream says, do you have experts you go to for research?
One of the joys of writing about a job you did for 39 years is that you are, in a sense, the expert already. I have a friend who's an ex-copper who who I know very well, and I quite often run things past him to say, would this happen? Would it happen like this? What's it, for instance, what's it like in a police car going on a car chase or something? Because I don't know. So I've got a police officer I check with. You've read No Bodies, and you know there's quite a lot of stuff about diseases in there. Well, I've got a friend who works for Public Health England who used to be an environmental health officer who worked for me. So I've got people around. And I try and avoid anything that I can't do justice to. The reason I don't write police procedurals is that I know what the police do, but I don't know what it's like being in an incident room. I don't know what it's like staring at CCTV cameras and stuff like that. So I try and avoid, if possible, anything that I don't really understand. And if I can't find it on Google, then I usually try and find somebody who can help me. There's quite a few people in the UK crime group. What's her name? Kate Bedlow, I think. Bedlow or Bedlow. She's very good with the forensics and stuff. I haven't needed to ask for anything yet, but I know there are people around who can help me.
Do you ever get called on to be an expert for other authors?
Not yet. I have seen environmental health officers come up in a couple of novels, and I'm a bit like these coppers who watch TV and go, it wouldn't happen like that. But nobody's asked me yet. They're quite welcome to, by all means.
I do that sometimes when teachers come up in novels.
Yeah, maybe I should have talked to you, but yes. Funnily enough, what you read was written in 2003 originally, and I think the world was probably a little bit different then. I don't know.
No, it's great. No Bodies and No Accident are both excellent books. It reminded me of why I liked Kent Fisher so much, reading No Bodies.
All I can say is if my readers are anything to go by, he gets better with each book. So you've seen the rough side of him in the first two books. He sort of mellows out a little bit as time goes on.
Samantha wants to know how you find the social media side of being an author.
I think I'll probably make the same comment that most people make, and that is once you start getting into social media, you don't have to get distracted and the hours just disappear. I can spend half an hour going through the UK Crime Book Club posts, and then you'll see one that interests you, so you'll read all the replies and things. In terms of promoting myself, I'm rubbish at it. So, I try, but I just put stuff out there, and I suppose, if I needed to write to live, then I'd probably be a lot better at it, because I'm unfortunately not in that situation where I have to rely on selling books to put food on the table. I don't really worry about it too much, but I do concentrate mainly on Facebook and mainly the UK Crime Book Group, but that's where I spend most of my time anyway.
So how do you find marketing? Do you do any marketing for your books?
Yeah, no, for instance, No Love Lost, which is coming out tomorrow, I've organised, we used to call them blog tours. I've called it a book launch. I've got together a number of bloggers and reviewers who've sort of been with Kent Fisher from the beginning. And whereas a blog tour is like 7 or 14 intense days of reviews going up, I found that quite difficult to keep up with because a lot of it's on things like Twitter, and I'm not really great with Twitter. So I've spread it out over about 3 or 4 weeks so that it isn't just this mad rush and onslaught of people on social media of Kent Fisher #6 and all these reviews. So that's the main marketing when the book comes out. I do write guest posts for reviewers here and there, and I do try and find new reviewers when I can. It's like everything else. If I really got my head down, I'm sure I could do it much better than I do. But at the moment, it's the writing, as all writers will tell you, it's the writing they enjoy most. And I could just do better at marketing, but one of these days I'll find a magic wand and do it much better.
There's quite a fiendish question on here. It just says YouTube user, so I don't know who it's from either. It says, how have your expectations changed since your first book in terms of your writing and your goals?
Sorry, what was it? How has my expectations changed?
Yeah, how have your expectations changed since your first book in terms of your writing and your goals?
Right. When I wrote No Bodies was the first Kent Fisher book I wrote, and I sent 3 chapters and a synopsis and all the usual stuff out to a load of agents and publishers in America and this country. And my expectations were quite high. I thought, I've written something quite original, different. I thought it was a good book. There was one agent in this country that actually read the whole book but didn't take me on it. But like I said, that was 2002, 3. That was a long time ago. Wind forward to about 2015, and I managed to find an American publisher who wanted to publish No Accident, which was then written as the first book. And my expectations went through the roof, I suppose. I finally made it. I found a publisher that wanted to publish it and all the rest of it. But it didn't really work out in the end. Being on either side of the pond, the Atlantic didn't help. And I think they had a different vision for the book, being American, than I had. So we parted company. And since then, my expectations have been quite modest, really. I'm delighted to finish a book that I think is good or good enough. That's what worries me. One of these days, I'll write a book that isn't good enough, and what do I do? So my expectations are really just get the best book I can write written. I publish it myself. So really, after that, it's just a case of hoping that I can spread the word and get other people to spread the word and build up a sort of following, really.
That question was from Tony Forder, but you're saying about approaching people over in America. How would you have to change things because of Kent's profession? Is there a lot of different procedures?
No. The funny thing is that the guy who ran the American company was English. He'd been in America for a long time. But the thing that upset me, there were 2 things that upset me. One was the fact that when they got the first manuscript, they edited it and changed a lot of English words to American words. So they Americanized it. And to say that I threw my toys out the pram is an understatement, because I had a line about furniture that looked like it had been recovered from a skip. It became furniture that had been recovered from a dumpster. And I thought, what dumpster? Kent Fisher would never say dumpster. And we had a big argument. And in the end, they relented and turned it back into English. And that was that was nobody's fault. That was just, they just wanted it Americanized for the American market, I suppose. But you live and learn.
Sam says, would you like to write full time, or do you have the best of both worlds?
I do write full time. When I received this offer for publication from the American company, I'd already been thinking of leaving my job. How can I put this? I'd managed to save up quite a bit of money that would keep me going till I could get my pension. And so I just thought, that's it. I've had enough. I had really had enough of environmental health and local government. So I just made the decision to pack it in and write full time. And I have to say, the stress levels went down immediately, and I've loved every minute since.
So you'll have seen quite a few sort of gruesome sights and things, I would imagine, being an environmental health officer. Is there anything you wouldn't write about?
Yeah. I investigated in my career 7 fatal work accidents, 2 of which involved children. And if people are trying to work out how a work accident can affect a child, if you imagine that a care home or a nursery is a place of work, and that's how we got involved in things like that. And one of them was an 8-year-old boy who drowned in a swimming pool. And I would love to write that story, but I mean, the parents are still alive. I just don't want to go there. I don't want to upset anybody when I write a book, So, there's quite a lot of stuff. And the worry always is when I describe the insides of pubs or restaurants, there's always a danger that if I'm using a real place, somebody might get offended. So if I'm going to describe something as a bit grotty, I tend to make up a place rather than use a real place. The only real places I use are ones that are very good and I know are very good, that I've inspected and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of stuff I can't touch because it would offend or hurt people, and that's not what I'm about. I'm about entertaining people with hopefully interesting murder mysteries, not slagging off a restaurant down the road.
There's quite a thread of humour in the books, like a dark humour. But is that intentional?
Yeah, that's me coming through, I'm afraid. I have to say that there's an awful lot of one-liners that I discard because, as good as they are and as funny as they don't actually fit into the story. But yeah, that's just me. I just have that sort of outlook on the world, that sort of slightly disbelieving, cynical, view, especially of politicians and politics and things like that. But most of it doesn't get into the books because, obviously, again, you don't want to say anything that might upset or offend somebody. So I try and keep it as sort of safe as possible for you. I mean, maybe I don't know. That's just how I try.
I'm noticing the picture of the dog on the wall behind you. Sorry.
Yep, that one. There's two.
Are they inspirations for Kent's dogs?
That's Harvey, who is the inspiration for Columbo, yes. And if I move that way, that's the first West Highland we had, Scooter, who died back in 2006. So, but Harvey is definitely the inspiration for Columbo. And if you knew Harvey, you could see him in Columbo when you read it. So, typical West Highland, small but determined, like myself.
Do you have beta readers?
Yes, in a sense, yes. Kath Middleton's very good. Has been a big help ever since I started, and she always manages to spot loads of stuff that I've missed. And but generally speaking, Kath and my wife do a brilliant job between them. They catch most of it, and what isn't caught is usually caught by my professional editor. And then after all that, I then post my book on Kindle and read it on Kindle, and I find a whole load of other stuff. So between the sort of four of us, we get most of the mistakes ironed out.
Yeah, Kath's fabulous.
Oh, she's brilliant.
She doesn't.
And she's been a big supporter of mine for ages. So many thanks, Kath.
We got to be nice to her. She's one of our admins.
Well, funnily enough, when the first No Accident, which was the American published version, was released, I think she contacted me and offered to do something on the UK Crime Book Group for me. I can't remember whether it was an interview or just a review or something. But yeah, so almost from the beginning when I started, I got to know Kath. And, like I said, she's been a great help over the years.
Yeah, she does help quite a lot of authors, I think.
Yes, I get that impression, yes.
Yeah, she's great. There's another question here from YouTube user. It says, who's your favourite fictional character? What is it about them that makes them your favourite?
Well, I'd have to go with my alter ego, Kent Fisher, and say a private detective in California called Kinsey Millay. That's Sue Grafton's creation. That was the character that inspired Kent Fisher, believe it or not.
I can see that. I've only ever read a Sue Grafton book, but I can see the...
Well, there was a lot of things about the book that in a way, I hadn't come across before. I mean, it was a first-person narration by Kinsey herself. She had a very sort of good sly sense of humour, that was poking fun at things. She was very determined, very sort of... she could look after herself. And I suddenly thought, this is the sort of character I was envisaging, only not a woman, but a bloke. And in a way, reading Kinsey Millay, I thought, maybe I can do this, And it gave me that sort of belief, and it gave me a sort of role model, something to aim for, which I didn't have before. Before, I just had basically a very gung-ho ex-army sort of environmental health officer who went around punching people, which obviously wasn't going to sell many books. So yes, Kinsey Millay's always been my favourite fictional hero.
That question was from Charlie Gallagher.
Oh,
Sam, our other author chat admin, wants to know how you come up with your character names.
ooh, lots of ways. I think I struggle to write about a character until I've got a name, because the name says so much to me about a character. It helps me to picture a character. So I'm a great one for graveyards. I think there was a guy called Colonel Witherington who was in one of my books. I don't know if it was book 2 or book 3. I think it was book 2 actually. Was it Nobody, Colonel Witherington?
Is he the sort of wealthy one who wants someone to investigate a missing person?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
I was trying to think how to describe it without giving a spoiler.
Yeah, no, he was the family friend. Yeah, and we were up in Stratford-on-Avon, where Shakespeare's buried, because we sort of rent a cottage just across the road, and we always walk the dog through the graveyard in the morning. And I just saw the name Witherington, and I thought that's perfect for my colonel, because it sort of suggests that it's someone who doesn't suffer fools gladly, and puts people in their place, and all the rest of it, which is the sort of character he was. Usually, I go on Google and I look up names and surnames, what they mean. I just sort of get a feel, if I'm creating somebody who works in an office who's an admin, I'm looking for a sort of blandish sort of name. If I'm looking for somebody who's a bit of a go-getter, you want the sort of name that sort of, in a way, gives a hint of that. So a lot of it is just really trial and error. I put names together and eventually something sticks.
I like that description. It's such an attention to detail. But also, do you think that thinking through the character names is what helps them be so real? Because people like Colonel Witherington, he doesn't appear a lot in the book, but he's really
pivotal.
Rich and vivid, pivotal.
I think. I mean, the biggest problem with names is that I have this awful habit of giving people names beginning with A, because I had an Alice, and you really have to stop and think about things. And there are certain names that I like, blokes' names, women's names, first names that I like, and I try and use them. And as I try and sort of picture this person, so if it was like, for instance, Louise, I would try and picture a Louise, and that sort of helps me to, get the surname in a way. And I don't always get it right. I often go into Word and replace names right throughout the book and change it to someone else. But the funny thing is, the minute you change somebody's name, they become a different person, which can be a bit awkward when you've written 3/4 of the way through a book and suddenly you change somebody's name and they seem a bit different to you. So I think the name's quite crucial, But I don't really get to know the characters until I write about them. But I can't write about them until I've got a name, if that makes sense. It's just the way I am, the way I work.
So Linda Checkley says, what author or authors do you always read when the books come out? I call them shut up and take my money authors.
Right. Peter James, first and foremost. I think he's brilliant. And his books are just set down the road, and half of them cover the districts I used to cover in the South Downs. But he is, I think he was voted the best crime writer in the UK a couple of years ago, and I personally think he's ahead of most people. You mentioned Tony Forder earlier. I've just started reading his D.I. Bliss books, and I've just finished the second one, and I would say that was as good as Peter James. That's the best accolade I can give for that. So he's fast becoming a favourite author. Sue Grafton has always been number one as far as I'm concerned, but as she died a couple of years ago, she won't be writing anymore, unfortunately. And I love going back. If I'm stuck for something to read, I always go and get an Agatha Christie, because I still think she is one of the best, without a doubt. And I read Murder at the Vicarage, which was written in 1930, and apart from the sort of attitudes and some of the language, I would say that was as fresh as anything I've read today. And this is 90 years old, but the writing is so fresh and crisp, and so that's probably my favourite. They're all my go-to readers at the moment.
Charlie Gallagher also wants to know how you come up with the title for your books and how important you think the title is.
I made a bit of a stick to beat myself with these because I wanted to have a bit like Peter James. I didn't know Peter James at the time, and he has dead in the title, in every title of every book. And I just wanted something that was distinctive, like a brand, if you like. And originally it was going to be Too Many. That was the key words, because No Bodies was called Too Many Secrets, I think, originally. And then somebody said to me, that sounds like a romantic novel. And I thought, yeah, it does, doesn't it? So that sort of ditched that idea. And I came up with this idea of No Bodies. And I thought, because there was a play on Nobody, No Bodies. And I decided I'd start all my books with a no. No accident, no bodies, etc. The trouble is that you can't always get a good no. Like no entry doesn't sound really that exciting. That was one I discarded a few weeks ago. And I had one called No Diving, which was going to be about a swimming pool. So in a way, it's difficult, but you just end up using words like mercy and remorse because they're the sort of words that you would expect on a sort of crime book, But I do try and link them to the theme, but I'm not sure how well they do fit. The latest one's called No Love Lost, which I think does fit, but No More Lies, which was a previous one, well, it was all right.
Do you design the covers yourself?
Yeah, I did. When I say I did, the background image is an image of the South Downs from a photograph I took. And the reason I wanted it on every book was two reasons. One was it saved me money to have the same background every book rather than having design a new cover every time. And two, it was again part of this brand thing. I wanted to have the South Downs on there. A friend of mine who is a graphic designer designed the fonts for the titles and everything else. And what I do is I try and put something in the foreground or in the right foreground of each book to relate to the book. So that's the only bit that differs apart from the title. So on the latest one, there is a baby in a crib on the cover, which is when you read the book, you'll understand why. There was. Hang on, can I just hold this one up?
Yeah, go for it.
That's the one you just read. There are a pair of stilettos and a handbag in the bottom there, I think. And I wondered how to depict no bodies apart from an empty grave, and I thought, you can't do that. So I came up with this idea that, because it was about missing women, that gave the impression that somebody might be missing. They'd left their stilettos and a handbag behind. And Jane, my friend, who's a graphic designer, took it and turned it into that. That's still one of my favourite covers. Turned it into that wonderful cover. And we've sort of been working on that sort of theme ever since. So even the colours, we only use 3 different colours for the covers because we found if we start moving into purples and things, it just doesn't work, So we're sticking to what we know looks right.
Well, Charlie says that was a great cover.
Oh, thank you. I say it's the one that started. We've had to change No Accident, which had a different cover on it, back to fit in afterwards. But yeah, it set the pattern.
So I'm going to ask you one of the UK CBC favourite questions now, which is, what are your most memorable moments as an author?
Oh dear, most memorable moments as an author. Gosh, that is a difficult question, isn't it? There's so many, I suppose. When I start writing the book, as I said, I just have an idea and I go, and I spend the first 3-4 weeks just worried that it's not going to work, it's not going to be good enough, I'm not going to have enough to fill 80,000 words and all the rest of it. And then suddenly something up in the subconscious clicks in and off I go. And those are all memorable moments when, the story that you didn't know existed suddenly tumbles out of your head. And I've had moments where I've had to just grab a pad of paper and I've been scribbling for an hour and a half to get this story down as it's coming rushing out of my head. So those are the memorable moments. Meeting Ellie Griffiths was quite a good moment as well. That was wonderful because I'm a fan of hers as well. Though I haven't read that many of her books, I just she's another one of these authors with a terrific sense of humour that just seems so at ease and I'd probably be the same if I got to meet Peter James. Actually, I'd probably be one of those people who just sort of stands there and clams up, because he's like quite a hero of mine. But no, it's mainly knowing that a story's going to work. I think those are the memorable moments, because you're always worried that it's not going to be good enough, or it's just not going to cut the mustard. So that's the self-doubt kicking in. So those moments when I realise the story's got legs, shall we say, are great. People say, don't you get excited when the book comes out? Sorry to be a bit of a misery guts, but no, I don't. I get excited when the book's finished, and I know people like Kath read it and say, yeah, it's all right, it's good. Those are the memorable moments. Probably before the book comes out.
So what stands out for me about your books is that there's a sort of a layer of really clever crime story that goes, and then there's also a layer of really interesting backstory about Kent and his family and his origins and everything else. Do you have an end in sight for your series that you're writing? Will we have a resolution about Kent?
When I wrote number 6, No Love Lost, when I ended it, I mean, it could end the series, the book. It could. And at the time, I did start to wonder whether that was it, because I didn't really have any idea where it would go after that. But like I said, what I always do is I always look at the backstory first, and I started looking at how the backstory ended in that book, and I suddenly realised that actually there was quite a lot of mileage left still in it, and so that sort of set me thinking. And then I had I can't say anything because it would spoil it, but I then had this, what I think was I don't know where this idea came from, but I'm delighted wherever it came from, in the ether. Thank you. And suddenly I've now got ideas for 2 more books. So at the moment, as long as I keep getting ideas, I'm just going to keep writing. And like I said, as long as I can keep the standard high, that's what worries me. I mean, the readers say each book gets better, and I thought, well, I can't keep getting better. I mean, at some point, I've got to plateau or nosedive. So, but as long as I can do it and keep churning out the goods, then I will.
So following on from that, Sam says, which relationship you created is your favourite?
Ooh. I rather like the on-off relationship Ken has with Gemma, his assistant and first love, if you like. That sort of will they, won't they sort of scenario that runs through quite a few of the books. There's always a danger that people will get a bit fed up with it and think, just sort it out once and for all. But for all those people who think that, who've read the books, in number 6, it is sorted out. But I think my favourite relationship is Kent and Kelly. Kelly, the wisecracking personal assistant for his boss, because she gets some of my best lines. And though if 2 people ever deserve to be together, it's those 2. But there's not much chance of it happening, I'm afraid, which makes it fun to write.
Do you read your reviews?
Yeah, all reviews. I think most authors do. I mean, there's a lot of clues in there as to what works, what doesn't work, what people like, what people don't like, and I've been very lucky that I've not had too many bad reviews. But even, if somebody genuinely doesn't like something, it's always interesting to look at it and think about it. So yeah, I read everything. It's feedback. Without feedback, you just don't know whether your book's hit the mark or not.
Do you have any plans to write any standalones or start any other series?
Well, you've got this short story anthology. I did actually submit a short story for that. So I sort of it served 2 purposes. One, I wanted to contribute to the anthology, and I hadn't written a short story for over 30 years, so it was quite a challenge. That's what I like, a challenge. And in the writing of it, I suddenly thought, actually, I could develop these characters possibly into another. It would be quite a cozy mystery rather than a sort of semi-cozy mystery like Kent Fisher is, but this would be much more a sort of cozy mystery, and it's just about a crime writer turning into a sort of sleuth, if you like. So that may yet turn out to be another string to my bow. I don't know.
That sounds good. I'll look forward to reading the story in the anthology.
Well, I hope it makes it. That's the first. It's got to make it. That's the first thing. But yes, if it does, then you'll get to read it.
Well, it's Kat and Will who are editing it, so I'm sure. Hopefully,
yeah, no, I'm sure there's an awful lot of good short stories coming in from a lot of very good authors. So But what I'm saying is if it doesn't make it, it's still given me an idea for something I could develop in the future. So if I do get tired of writing Ken Fisher or I run out of ideas, there is something else to turn back to.
Would you ever be tempted to do some spin-offs about Kent Fisher's characters?
Well, I have. I wrote another short story about Kent's earlier years when he was a hunt saboteur and stuff like that. And I did that because it features two characters that are going to appear in the next book. And I thought it was a good way to sort of introduce these characters before they were written into the book. But it's about in the days before Kent decided to start solving murders, he was still up to tricks and doing all the usual stuff. So that was quite interesting. I know some authors have written short stories about sort of side issues or issues that crop up in their books. I've never really felt tempted to do that, to be honest. But I quite like the idea of like sort of young Kent Fisher, like young Morse and all the other that they seem to be doing on the telly. So who knows? Maybe some more short stories.
Yeah, maybe. I quite like the spin-off stories sometimes about like side characters. Some authors do that. I'm trying to think of an example. Ben Aranovich does it. He's got a long-running series called The Rivers of London, and he does side stories about like there's two main characters, but like other characters crop up a lot, and he does little side stories about them.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that could be quite interesting. I mean, it's just not something that's ever really occurred to me, to be honest.
Sam wants to know what you're working on at the moment, and do you work on more than one project at a time?
No, I don't. I can only do one thing at a time. I don't know how. I read some authors write 3 books at once. I can't imagine trying to get my head around 3 books. One book's enough. I'm not working on anything at the moment. I mean, I'm on the second week of a holiday at the moment at home, but so I'm having a rest. It'll be probably back to Ken Fisher number 7 next week, or maybe my new short story character. It just depends what sort of mood I'm in next Monday.
So what inspires each novel? What gives you the thread of the idea? Is it something you see in the news? Do you just come across them? Where do you go for inspiration?
The first book, No Accident, was a deliberate attempt to show how an environmental health officer could solve a murder by looking at investigating a fatal work accident that was actually a murder. I can't really explain where the inspiration for that comes without giving away some of the plot, so I'll have to pass on that. But environmental health officers know and go into an awful lot of businesses. So number 3's part of the setting is a luxury care home. And I inspected quite a few of them in my days. So I thought that would be an interesting place to have a murder. And lo and behold, Richard Osman has gone and pitched the idea now. Number 4, I think. No More Lies. That was a cold case. I think when you've got an amateur sleuth who's not a policeman, you have to try and have crimes that the police wouldn't investigate. So like a cold case, an accident that's really a murder, a suicide that's really a murder. So I always try and come up with something that the police wouldn't necessarily be directly involved in or investigating, because I can't have him investigating alongside the police, because I just can't think that would work. So yeah, so there was a cold case. Book 5, No Mercy, was centred on, this is going to sound incredibly boring, the food hygiene rating scheme, believe it or not. I always wanted to explore the possibility of someone who could fell foul of the scheme and kicked off and caused the right furore. And that's what I did, except I just murdered the bloke in the book, so made it a bit more interesting. Because that's how I feel about some of the people who used to complain. So I suppose that was that was me exercising a few ghosts. No Love Lost, the latest one. I wanted the hunter to become the hunted. Let's put it that way. I thought that would make it a really personal book, really personal story. And the tagline is "This time it's personal." So and so again, there's nothing to do with the police as such in that one, because obviously it's a personal attack on Ken Fisher, as it turns out.
Have you ever written any non-fiction?
Well, I've written loads of reports at work, but no, not really. I think I've made enough mistakes in my life that I could probably write a good book on how to write properly and how to get published, because I've managed to make most of the mistakes during my life. But no, I'm not sure I could write non-fiction, to be honest. Really, I haven't got a clue where to start. I suppose you've got to find a problem and solve it, I suppose.
Do you have you ever used any real people as characters in your books?
No. I think. How can I describe this? When my first book was, when I got the offer of publication, and people at work, I told people at work what happened. That was the first question I got asked: "Are we in it? Are any of us in it?" And my answer was no. I wanted to create interesting people. I know that sounds a bit horrible, but it's true. I mean, I don't, I didn't know half of these people, so I try and create them from scratch, because I want them to just be, I don't really want to use people I know, because, you don't want to offend people, and I don't want to be governed by these people. If I know they've got certain habits or certain things, then, they might not fit the character I'm creating. So I'd rather just start with a blank canvas. That doesn't mean I don't pinch things that people say, expressions and mannerisms and things. I do that. And occasionally, some of the characters remind me of people, but that's not intentional. That's just the way it turns out.
You're never tempted to sneak Kath in as like a glamorous older murderer or something?
Well, I've had this idea to hold a competition to see if anybody wanted to be a character in my book. But I know other authors have done this, and I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. It depends on whether they get murdered in the first chapter. They might not thank me for it. No, but no, like I said, every character fulfills a purpose in a book, and I think even the minor characters, they have a little role to play. So I just tend to prefer to create a lot. I mean, most of the places in the book are created, apart from certain things I can't change, like the coast and towns. It's just more fun that way.
So my favourite question to ask authors is, would you ever make a graphic novel of one of your books?
No, I have. I wanted, when I started writing, I pictured it on the TV, and I don't mean I was being some sort of ego trip. I just thought if it was on the telly, and I wanted it to go on the 8 o'clock slot on a Sunday that used to be, when Morse used to be on, Endeavour and things like that. That's the sort of book I want to write, and I have a very simple thing about sex, that readers' imagination is far better than what I can write. So let readers imagine what they want. Same with violence. I mean, I don't. You only have to watch the news if you want to see violence. So I'd rather not go down that line. If that places my books at the cosy end of the market, so be it. But that's not the sort of person I am. I'm not interested in stuff like that. I don't read gritty, horrendous novels and things like that.
So if you were picturing it on TV, who would Kent be?
That's a good question. I've no idea. The funny thing is, there's a friend of ours, and her son is just finished a drama degree, and he would be great as Kent Fisher. He's just 20 years too young, unfortunately. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the good. struggling because I'm trying to think of the guy's name. There is somebody who my wife's rather fond of who she thinks would be rather good as Ken Fisher, but I apologise to my wife. I can't remember his name. I know he was in Holby City for a while, one of the doctors. He was on Strictly Come Dancing as well. I think, wasn't it? But I can't think of his name. Dark-haired fella.
For him.
Yeah. I can't. I don't really. This is going to sound crazy. I don't really know what Ken Fisher looks like. Does that sound strange? I never describe him, or very rarely describe anything.
He's not really described very.
No, I don't, because I want readers to picture their own Ken Fisher, not a sort of my version of Ken Fisher. So I don't really know what he looks like. I know what he's like as a person, and I know what he does. I know all that side of it, but apart from the fact that he used to wear an electric blue shirt, there's not really much about him that I don't really sort of see a face when I write about him. I just see the character.
When you said he was like the actor you were talking, your drama student being 20 years too young for him, I was trying to think if you'd ever mentioned how old he was.
Yes, he's in his early 40s. It is mentioned somewhere. I think he's probably now about 44, I think. A bit younger than me.
Similar age to me.
Well, he's old enough to know better, but he doesn't.
Older than me. Yeah. But yeah, no, I agree. You don't do a lot of description of Kent apart from his favourite clothing.
I just thought it'd be nice for people to picture their own character, because that's what people do. When you read a book, you get an image of someone, and then you see this all the time. I think wasn't there uproar when the Jack Reacher films were produced, and what's his name? I've forgotten his name as well now. Terrible. The actor who played
Tom Cruise.
Yeah, there was uproar, wasn't it? Because they said, well, he's Jack Reacher's about 6'6" tall, and Tom Cruise is like 5'2", and all this, that, and the other. So I think this is the trouble. You put people on the telly, and they're not how people imagine them. So I've just sort of left it to the reader's imagination. Everybody can have their own individual version of it.
So, how did lockdown affect your writing? And would you write about lockdown? You sort of touched on other diseases.
You see, the problem was I was writing No Love Lost when lockdown came in at the end of March, and I thought, do I put it in the book or don't I? And the trouble was that if I put it in the book, half the action that goes on in the book couldn't have happened, because obviously it involves going into places, people getting together in close contact, all the rest of it. So I made the decision not to include it. The other thing is that the books are written in what I think is called the eternal present. So whenever you read it is when it happens, sort of thing. I try not to put anything in that would date it or set it in a particular year or time zone. So somebody reading it in 3 years' time could think it was happening then, not 3 years ago. That's how I got round it. But in terms of affecting me, I mean, I sit at home every day writing, so I just carried on really. I know from social media, a lot of authors were struggling. The funny thing is that environmental health are quite heavily involved in policing shops and things during the lockdown, and all the precautions they have to take. And I thought more about that than anything else, because obviously I wasn't in the job anymore, but you still think about things like that. And I was still talking to colleagues, so that was really the closest I came to it, was the sort of enforcement side that local authorities were going through and some of the difficulties they had. But I know it was a weird time, the fact that you just couldn't walk down the road and go in a shop, sort of thing, almost, or you couldn't go into a pub because they were closed. But then equally, I saw lots of people out walking with their children, which I hadn't seen before, people going into the countryside. So, it was a mixed bag, really. But it didn't really affect my writing, other than should I include COVID in the book?
Yeah. Do you keep up to date with, changes in environmental health?
No, not really. I mean, I'm one of those people that when I move on, I move on. So when I left environmental health, even though I've done nearly 40 years there, I became a writer, so I was interested in writing and all the rest of it. And the only thing I wanted to do was keep in touch with a number of friends I had who were in the profession. So they tell me things that are going on, but I don't actively follow it, unless, of course, it's pertinent to the story that I'm writing.
What drew you into being an environmental health officer in the first place?
What, sorry?
What made you become an environmental health officer in the first place?
Well, if I said to you that my first choice of profession was, can I admit this? Yeah, go on. I wanted to be an actor when I was at school, and after the whole class fell about the place laughing, that rather put a dent into that. And I wanted to go into journalism, and the careers officer kiboshed that and said, "Oh, no, that's no career," and all the rest of it. And we're talking, 1977? Up north where I was at the time, there was quite a lot of unemployment. And I decided that I'd like a job where I could do a qualification and have a job to go to at the end of it. And I was told that local council would do that for environmental health officers and building inspectors. And being 18, young and sort of idealistic, I wanted to save the planet from pollution, so I chose environmental health, only to find out that that's not what environmental health did. But I've had a great career, so it didn't matter. I mean, it's a wonderful job if anybody out there ever thinks of a changing career. I mean, it covers everything you can possibly imagine in life. And you meet some great people, like I'm sure you do in your job. But yes, really, it was just having a job at the end of, doing a degree and having a job to go to. Because there were people with degrees emptying dustbins in those days. I didn't want to end up, spending all that time at university and then having nothing to show for it, sort of thing.
So, when did the inspiration to be an author arrive?
Oh, I think when I read The Famous Five, probably. I was lucky. I learnt to read before I went to school. My father taught me. The trouble is, it was probably the Sunday Mirror or something like that we learnt to read from. So it probably wasn't the most literary start in life. But I got into trouble at school because they seemed to get quite upset that I could read, which I never understood. But I think the trouble is that I could read words, but I didn't necessarily understand how they were created and what letters meant. So, I mean, there was a chunk of my education that was missing. I just happened to be able to read words on a page. But yeah, The Famous Five was I would have loved to have written stories like that. And I think I won a national short story competition when I was 12 years old. So that sort of gave me a bit of a clue. So heaven knows why I wanted to become an actor after that. I don't know. But yeah. But no, it was To Kill a Mockingbird that made me want to write novels, because I mean that's a wonderful book and left me in tears for weeks afterwards. So I thought I'd love to write a book like that in my view, change the world or change people's opinion. One day, maybe.
It's a good novel.
Oh,
we have about a minute and a half left.
Oh gosh.
Do you want to remind everyone about your books? Maybe show us the covers.
Well,
tell us a little bit about Kent.
This one comes out tomorrow. Can you see that yet?
Yeah.
No Love Lost. That's the latest one. I won't show you all the rest of them because it gets a bit boring. But they're all on Amazon. They're easy to find. Robert Crouch author on a search in Amazon will pick me up. They're on my website, which is robertcrouch.co.uk. So they're all there. And do what I do, read the look inside bit and see whether it's the sort of book you want to read or not.
Can people order signed copies from you?
Yes, they can if they're in this country and they don't mind paying the postage, because I can sell the books a bit cheaper than Amazon, but obviously the postage sort of pushes them up to about the same sort of price. But yeah, I can sign and dedicate them. I don't know. Get people to get in touch. They can message me, or there's a contact page on the website.
Fabulous. Well, thanks for joining us.
Well, no, thank you, Caroline. You and Sam, I mean, you're doing a great job with all these interviews. I don't know how you find the time and the energy.
We're not quite sure either.
You're doing about 2 or 3 a week. And I was saying to my wife earlier, I'm not a member of many groups on Facebook, but I don't know anybody else who's doing all this. I mean, if there are other groups doing it, great. But I think it's quite unique. And, I'm just amazed